Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil. I do apologize if this video skips it all. I don't understand. My Streamlabs has been acting up all night. It was when I was streaming, and I had a whole video recorded and I was lagging all over the place. It was a mess, and so I apologize, but I'm trying to get this out because it is important. The audio is the most important part here. We're going to be talking about Relic Delta. We got a huge design fireside chat edition update from Meathead, from the dev team, talking about Relic Delta, Relic 10, new game modes coming, new changes to events, there's changes to Relic economy. It makes your mind hurt. There's a lot of good information in here, a lot of information also just kind of defending Relic Delta and why it needs to happen. And as many of you know, I think this is a post that a lot of us were just kind of waiting to see at the beginning. I think Relic Delta is still not something I want to see in the game. It's still not something that I think is completely necessary. But after reading their posts, I can understand their mindset, and I can at least agree with them to an extent that they're trying to update the game for the future. So while I don't think Relic Delta is purely the answer, I can recognize at how they arrived at the solution, and I can support them in that front. With that said, like, subscribe, comment down below. I want to give a shout out to my channel members quickly for all their continued support. If you guys are ever interested, link down below, along with a link to Discord. I cannot appreciate you guys enough for just, bearing with me while I try to stream, do whatever it is. I really appreciate all of you, and I can't thank you enough for the continued love and support. So let's get in here and let's talk about some Relic Delta. Alright, so we're going to flip over to the screen capture here. So we've got this design fireside chat, and I'm going to kind of just read certain sections. I'm going to summarize kind of everything. There's a lot in here. There's a table of contents, it's a lot. So, we've heard the concerns about splitting focus between increasing relic levels on older characters to account for Relic Delta, while still wanting to pursue newer characters. With our upcoming release, we will be changing how players get and invest in new characters. More details to come later on that, but the relevant portion for Relic Delta is this. You'll be progressing through gear tiers and lower relic levels without needing to use gear or relic materials, which frees up those resources to be spent on older characters. Additionally, both droid brains and higher level signal data will be added as outputs from the scavenger, giving players an alternative means of acquiring those materials. Lastly, the playtest is still ongoing, and we are continuing to gather feedback from the testers in the community. We simply wanted to provide the context that folks have been requesting. Let's get into it. Again, big thumbs up here. Context is so important as to why you feel this update is necessary and what's going into it. They talk a lot about, listen, droid brains and high-level signal data being added as outputs to the scavenger is huge. We'll get more into what those are right in a second here. You will be progressing through gear tiers and lower relic levels without needing to use gear or relic materials, which frees up those resources to be spent on older characters. What this sounds like to me is they no longer felt they could solve the bottlenecks for things like Kyrotex, Carbonis, those gear pieces that we use. These new characters, what I'm wondering is if they're not going to need that stuff. And even some of those lower relic materials, they won't need them. The game is just kind of progressing beyond this, and it's time to kind of wave the white flag and say, we don't have a good way to change this bottleneck, so we're just going to completely eliminate it. Again, I don't hate that approach as long as it's doing what we need and getting players to where they can actively play in the game. So I'm going to skip the table of contents and go all the way down to the bottom here to kind of like the future, right? I think this should have been like the second paragraph in the, or like the second section, because they kind of talk about it and then they kind of don't until the very end here. So they talk about with the changes to Relic Delta, Relic 10 is being added to the game. Please see above as to why it doesn't solve the core problem. It will use new signal data, which I called. I said they needed a new color of signal data. It will not be farmed with energy, so it will not disrupt your current signal data farming. Instead, the new signal data will be available in both scavenger and other game modes. Finally, there will be a new game mode, new events, and an update to era-related journey guide events, ensuring that all players get to use new characters right away for valuable rewards. What I'm assuming is referring to, if I was to flip over to the game here, what I'm wondering is, you think about a character like Hondo right now, and maybe I should have gone to this page here. Hondo, the only thing stopping me from unlocking him is character shards. It's literally like, if I had the character shards, I'd have Hondo already. But I don't have the character shards. So maybe for Hondo, that's an extreme example, but where I'm wondering is for a character like Jedi Master Mace Windu, for characters like maybe Balin Skull and, Starkiller and, Jedi Cal, I'm wondering if what they're going to be doing is reducing some of the requirements to allow you to unlock these characters earlier. Maybe the way you unlock Mace at 3-star is using, Relic 3-star characters or whatever it is, right? Because I think part of the problem and the reason a lot of players aren't investing in stuff is because the cost of entry is so high to get a 7-star Mace Windu that most players are like, I'll just get it when I get it, because I can't be arsed to start this now. So I want to give them credit there that if that's the direction they're going to head, I'm all for it. So that's kind of the conclusion of, hey, we're getting a new game mode. I don't know what it's going to be. The new events, we're still waiting on Smuggler's Run 3 for Hondo. I think we can safely assume it's going to somehow correlate to Relic 10 and this new signal data, which explains why it's not in game yet. Obviously, if that's the case, it's going to change Hondo's value significantly, and we'll try to make sure we cover that on the channel. What they do say is, we hope this context helps our choices around Relic Delta make a bit more sense. We will monitor the impact of Relic Delta in PvP game modes and make adjustments as needed. We are passionate about the game and care about you, our players. As always, we'd love your feedback and your continued feedback on Relic Delta. So continue to give your feedback. If you don't like it, hey, explain why. Be constructive with your criticism. I don't think Relic Delta is still a great thing, but after reading the post, I at least understand where they're coming from and can probably structure my criticism better after reading this post. So to kind of scroll up to the top, what they kind of talk about, if you will, is the progression. So progression in this game is vertical. You increase your power to engage with the increased content that they're releasing. Think about, that, hey, to, participate in the newest game mode, you need to be at the newest level. One of the examples I would use, if you've ever played, if you're, one of the RPGs I played back in the day was Borderlands. And Borderlands had a DLC. And in the base level cap was level 50. If you bought this DLC, your max level cap was 69. Get it? 69. It's funny. But the level cap was 69, and it was raised, but so were the enemies. The enemies were more challenging. You needed those you needed those extra levels to compete. Comparative to if you ever played The Force Unleashed. Your level never really changes, but you get more tools. It's horizontal. The game kind of gets easier because they give you more tools to win, but you don't necessarily you're not you get more powerful, but not in there's new missions, but there's not new content that, this stuff existed and it's meant for this and now you need to get this. It's a lot more, it's horizontal, right? So they explain those differences. And Galaxy of Heroes is vertical, and we need that new content to continue to engage us. So they get into scalability, and the long and short of scalability is when gear was kind of moved into relics, it had to do with the fact that they couldn't scale gear to continue on in a meaningful way. So they're like, all right, well, we're going to create relics. Well, the problem with relics, in my opinion, and they talk about this, relics haven't seen a new level of progression in 4 years, 2025 now, back in 2021. It's because they rushed out Relic 8 and they rushed out Relic 9 without thinking about the consequences of Relic 10, 11, 12, and how to release them. And so I think now they're kind of paying for the mistakes of their past a little bit, and that's kind of why Relic Delta is becoming a thing. You rushed out these earlier Relic, upgrades without thinking about the future, and now you're like, all right, well, Relic 10, what do we do? And had we slowed down Relic 8, we'd slowed down Relic 9, maybe we wouldn't need Relic Delta because Relic 10 would be more thought out, more valuable to the player base. Right? So that's kind of what they talk about with scalability. And again, with scalability, they talk, a ton of, they go into a ton of this stuff. And I like that they bring this part up, right? With scalability, what they're looking at here is they're saying, hey, how does this work for Relic 9, for Relic 10, for Relic 11 and beyond? They're looking to create a system that is cognizant of the future, which that's something that maybe some games in this game at times has struggled with. You've got to be able to look at the future. One of the things they say I don't like is, we've heard from the community that players don't think Relic 9 is worth investing in outside of requirements, GLs, and the occasional tank. And then they go on to say Relic 9 still loses to Relic 5, just like Relic 8 does. And this to me is a load of waffle. This whole thing, what's the other thing they said? I don't know if it's here or somewhere else. They talk about a Gear 12 Malicos beating a Relic 8 Ray. Like that's, this to me right here is a load of waffle. It has nothing to do with the relic levels. It has to do with the kit. It has to do with the design. It has to do with the strategy and the datacrons. So I don't think this is a fair assessment to say, right? But this part here, this Relic 9 worth investing in outside of requirements, GLs, the occasional tank. I've told this story on stream. I'm going to tell this, kind of quick anecdote. My family, when my father first got his job, when I was born, we didn't have a lot of money. And his boss at the time was, kind of bragging to my dad a little bit about his pocket knife collection. And my dad was like, yeah, that's real cool. Like, you have this pocket knife collection. I'm, struggling to put food on the table at home, but, you've got this pocket knife collection. And, my dad, through a lot of hard work and blessings from the Lord, was eventually able to, buy his first pocket knife. And how I know that is because he told me this story. He told me and my friends this story the night before my wedding. And, it's one of the few times I've ever seen my father cry, is telling this story about how he finally, bought his first pocket knife and how proud he was. And he, showed it to his boss. And he's like, and it wasn't the nicest of knives, but it was, it was really special to him. And, and he gave it to me on my wedding, the night before my wedding to say, to pass it on and to, as a reminder of where we'd come from. And it, in this, you think like, Phil, how does this have to do with this sentence? And like the point that for my father, it wasn't that the knife wasn't cool. It wasn't that he didn't want to have a pocket knife collection, but like he didn't have the resources to be able to create one. If, to the boss, like give my dad double his salary and maybe he could get, and of course, like you say, it's not realistic, but you get the idea. Like, you don't have the resources. It doesn't matter how much you do or don't want to do something. I'd love to Relic 9 my entire friggin' account, but I don't have enough Relic 9 materials to make that happen. They're not accessible enough in the game. So I think that it's not that we would say it's not worth investing, because that's not really, it's kind of taking our words out of our mouth and twisting them, right? No, it's not worth investing because we don't get enough Relic 9 materials that you want to be just spending them willy-nilly. And that's exactly the way that my dad was with that pocket knife. Like, he can't be spending money on pocket knives when he's got to put food on our table. But you got some extra cash to spend, hell yeah, buy a friggin' pocket knife, So I hope you guys, bear with me on that story. But I think that's very relevant to that and part of the larger problem. So then they talk about the possible solutions of doing nothing, which again, that's ludicrous, right? Skip. Change relic stats on existing relic levels. This is I like this example. Relic 9 is updated to add additional 50 mastery and 100 speed. And they say they're like, the problem is some characters come out winners, but many would be like losers. Can you imagine Marin? Marin getting 100 speed is friggin' useless. Who the hell cares if Marin gets additional speed? Dark Trooper, I really don't need him getting additional speed. But even think about the mastery for a second. Not all characters are created equal. Not every character has mastery. Some of them are just related to their Omicron, and then Galactic Legends also hand it out, and they don't even hand it out equally. So you would end up in a situation where these stats would benefit more characters than others. Introducing Relic 10 by itself with no new content to support it. Relic 9 is already difficult to acquire. many wouldn't even have any Relic 10 characters. The top end would invest as much as necessary, and we'd end up in the same place as we are with Relic 9, so that makes sense. Add damage increase to the top few levels, and they're basically like, no, this doesn't work. And again, they go into the detail. I don't hate that. And so then that's kind of how they landed on Relic, Delta, is going through all of these other areas and kind of saying, all right, Relic Delta makes the most sense, right? And they talk about how 10 years ago when the game launched, they had a level of this system, but it was around crit chance, accuracy, evasion, damage. Only crit chance and resist chance had any values, so only those two were ever in play. So even then, like, you talk about all these other things, but they only really were two things that were impacted there. It's, a level delta is broadly used. They talk about that, right? What they said is, we chose for Relic Delta to only apply to damage because we wanted the stats on Relic levels themselves to still matter, which I can agree with that. That's important. You think about, like, some of the other things you get in there, that is an important, conversation to have. Here's where they talk about this Gear 12 Malicos being a Relic 8 Ray. If your Relic 8 Ray got beat by a Gear 12 Malicos, I need to see your mods. I need to see the Malicos. Like, I need to see some information, because a standard Gear 12 Malicos cannot be a Ray. So that's a ridiculous, to me, this is a ridiculous example. That's an absolutely ridiculous example. Like, that is not the norm. That's not even like that is such a small, maybe one time it friggin' happened. But what they do finally address here is, hey, we know other games have this, Marvel Strike Force. The system is a gradual curve rather than a massive boost at just one level of difference. I'm going to call BS on this and say, listen, that sounds good, right? Oh, it's not a massive boost, but, I'm just going to pull up a quick picture here, because I think that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You started this test out at 20% each way. Right now it's still sitting at 10% each way. That's a massive boost. If I told you tomorrow you were getting a 20% increase in your salary, you'd do a damn backflip. If my boss told me I'm getting a 10% increase in my salary, I'm doing naked cartwheels around my house, let alone, the 20%. So, like, it doesn't sound like a lot until you put it into context of something else, right? So, again, I'm just, playing the devil's advocate there, that, like, that sentence isn't really accurate, because you are using some big friggin' thresholds. What I do agree with is they say, hey, the system has a single progression, relics which are becoming more accessible, rather than requiring in multiple disparate systems that have differing rates of accessibility. Basically saying this entire thing is based on your relics, which we're making easier to get. They talk about some alternate versions, only increasing damage, not decreasing it. I do appreciate this. What they're basically saying here is that your Supreme Leader Kylo Ren gonna deal, a ton more damage, but he still is a glass tank. He's still gonna get one shot by something, and then you're gonna be PO'd. The average relic level of a team, this is a good one. Basically saying here, what we don't want players trying to take advantage of is, oh, I have a bunch of Relic 9s and I'm going to throw this Relic 5 character in there and they're going to get all that benefit. They're not looking at that from an average level. They're looking at it from a character by character level. And that's where we kind of end off with this Relic 10 update, the new signal data, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of good information. Again, as I said, I did this on stream because I wanted to be able to break down each individual piece. I want to be able to read it. If you haven't read it yet, I'm going to link it below. Make sure you watch it. Make sure you watch this video, watch others, and read it for yourself. Understand what's going on. As I said, after reading this, I can tell you, I can understand why they want Relic Delta to be a thing. And I will be able to provide my feedback more accurately now when I understand what they're going for. A lot of it, I think, comes down to scalability and the vertical progression. Basically saying, hey, what we want to be able to do is scale this game for additional relics to come in without feeling like we're making Relic 10 and Relic 11 and 12 unbeatable to everything before it. still firmly in this camp of there's probably, there's got to be a better way to do this. We don't need Relic Delta, but I can understand the context and I will be able to more formulate my reaction properly, in relation to this topic. That's the end of the video, my friends. Let me know your thoughts down below. Like, subscribe, comment. I love you all. May the force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.